Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at three baseball sets Topps made in the mid-1990s, Embossed, D3, and Topps Laser. These three sets are really unusual sets that they created in kind of that crazy time in the mid-90s when everybody was just kind of trying stuff, and there were a lot of one and done and two-run sets. For Topps, they'd had a tradition of making great baseball cards over the years, but not necessarily high quality cards. They made great baseball cards because of the tradition. But as competition was coming from Fleer and especially from Upper Deck, the level of quality that they had to maintain, but not just that, the innovation, it was increasing at a pretty rapid pace. And so they had to start really thinking outside the box. And that started off in 1992 and 93 with Finest. In Finest, they had created one of the most complex cards in terms of technology. They'd really created a very impressive card in terms of the actual makeup of the card. But they were already starting to get some competition. Pacific had made a Prism set, Upper Deck was making etched metal cards, and so Topps understood that they had to keep kind of pushing the boundary. And they wanted to kind of explore around and play around with some ideas for making cards in ways that wasn't really all that common. This started off in 1994 with their Embossed set, which they released in basketball. And then they followed that up in 1995 with a baseball set with the same name, almost the exact same card. Not quite, it's pretty close. The basketball set actually had a border, the baseball set, as we'll see, didn't. Now, embossed cards were nothing new for Topps. They'd actually made a whole series of cards in 1965 that were embossed. And embossed cards were not new to the market in recent times because Action Pact had really made they cut their teeth on it. That's what they were. And the problem with embossed cards is normally when you're embossing a surface like this, the way that you do it is you extrude out the pattern from behind. So you get a relief on the top surface, which is the bust that you're creating, the contours that you're making. Well, on the flip side, that's where everything gets pushed out, so it's indented. And that doesn't really work too well in terms of a total card design. With Action Pact, they played a trick where they curled the card around and they packed that in so that you never saw the indented side. You only saw the side that was extruded out, the relief. But with Topps, they didn't want to just go that route. They wanted to make a card that was more impressive than that. And so what they decided to do was to create a card where instead of extruding out the image, they would push in. They would indent everything and just leave the contours immersed out and not packed in the same way. So they made a really thick card that they could then use to double stamp and create the patterns on both sides. So whatever that you see on the front side has nothing to do with what's on the back. And it's a really impressive technique. The baseball set was done in kind of a borderless approach. There technically is a border, as we'll get to in a second, but the border bleeds off of all sides. Now you can see that there's an inner band of kind of like a border, and then the player is inside of that. The player himself is all contoured, but right around the outside, around the band on the outside, there's actually a really fine dot pattern all around the outside, so there is actually a border, you just can't see it. And then when you flip the card over, on the card back, all the detailing that goes in there, the boxes, etc., that's what all of the embossed patterns align with. So the front of the card has one embossing, the back of the card has a completely different embossing. And the approach that they used to making these cards was really good. In basketball, because of the frame and the choice of the images, it didn't carry really all that well. But in baseball, they liven the cards up, so they're a lot brighter. And the images are very well selected, so you actually have a really clear shot of each player. The player is not just the centerpiece of the card, they are the card. That is the whole point. If you're doing an embossing, if you're doing this relief, you need for the player to really carry through because that's the whole point of the card. And they were able to capture that really well. And the fact that they basically made the border disappear and just kind of hinted at the border was something that really helped the card as well. Now, unfortunately, it meant that the cards were not dynamic enough to really grab your eye. They're beautiful cards, they're elegant cards, they're just not engaging cards. On the card back, instead of having a really bright card, they had a really dark card, a very subdued card, very formal. It looks really nice. Again, it's nothing that really jumps out, but if you want to take the time, these are gorgeous cards. The card set did have one subset, but it's not really a subset, it's a theme. There's not a single player that has two cards in this set. So what they did was they made a theme, kind of like in basketball. In basketball, they did all the rookies with a silver foil. Well, in baseball, you don't really have rookies too much. And so what they did was they had an award winner subset. And here, they did the whole background as foil. And then the player is the only part of the card that's not in foil. And the foil has a bunch of different receding frames heading in, all of the different foil etching. in different patterns. So the card just has this radiant quality coming out, which is really pretty neat. And the theme is, like I said, it's award winners, but it's players who at one point in their career were either Rookie of the Year or MVP. So any player who had ever been an MVP or been a Rookie of the Year in the Major League Baseball, their card was done in this way. Other than that, they didn't have any inserts. And the only other thing that they had going for the set was the fact that the entire set was done with a parallel with gold foil. So in the case of the award winners, it's pretty obvious. All the silver foil gets replaced by gold foil. But for the regular cards, it's a little bit trickier because there's almost no gold foil on it. So what were they going to do? Well, in this case, they actually took the player, the image of the player, and used a gold finish over that. And then the border itself also gets a gold treatment of foil overlaid, so you can still see through. It's just kind of burnished with the gold, which means that for the card, the only part that does not have the gold foil is actually the background. And this actually worked against the card because while it's a neat idea, it means that when you look at the card, all you see is the background. Everything else is really difficult to see. It's a neat parallel, it's just not a very effective one. And so it just kind of enunciated how this card set, it was a brilliant idea, they just hadn't worked out all the kinks and hadn't figured out how to make the card stand out. I wish that they'd made a set in 1996 because I'd love to have seen them really refine it, but it was a great idea that they tried and didn't really go anywhere. They didn't even make a football set. So that was their run at Embossed, and it was basically a one and done. But it wasn't the only thing they did in 1995. They also made a set called D3, which was Dimension 3, or 3D. And in this case, they used an old technology that had been used basically since the 1960s called lenticular design. And this is where you have a plastic coating on the top surface, and as you turn the card, the little lenses in it give you a changing pattern. A lot of the time, like with sport flicks, they just use 2 or 3 pictures that they flash back and forth between, but sometimes they'll use it to create the appearance of 2 different planes moving in different ways, and that gives the ability for the card to look kind of three-dimensional. But normally you do that with a manufactured back. You don't really do it with a photograph. So what Topps wanted to do with D3 was they wanted to use actual photographs so it looked like a three-dimensional space in a stadium. And unfortunately, they never made it work. These cards, they came out kind of fuzzy. The image wasn't all that clear. The range of motion was very limited. Unfortunately, it didn't really carry. They intended for this to be 2 series. This is actually referred to as Series 1. It's 59 cards and 7 inserts, and that was it. They never got around to making a second set. In fact, they even tried to make a football set. They made a promo card for it, but they never made the full football set. So the card set just didn't go anywhere. The cards themselves were really kitsch in how they were made. These were, the back was just kind of a mess. The card front, like I said, never quite worked. With the insert cards, those cards actually did work a lot better because they didn't have an image in the back. They were able to use something else that they were able to better control, but unfortunately the card set just didn't go anywhere. So they tried it, and in this case it was not even a one and done, it was actually a half and done. But that's part of the fun of the 90s, is there was a lot of stuff that was explored. For 1996, they decided to make another run at making an interesting card, but instead of manufacturing something out of thin air, they decided to go with something they were already doing. In Stadium Club, they had been using a technique called laser cutting to make some of their insert cards. And with the insert cards, they were able to take advantage of thin cardstock because as an insert card, you tend to treat it a lot more delicately. But now they wanted to make a whole set with die cutting, and they understood that among other things, they were going to need to make sure that the card stock itself was really firm, because they were going to have to be able to hold up against a fair amount of abuse. Just the amount of work that you have dealing with sets, moving cards around, doubles, just the number of cards in the packs. It was going to take a lot. So for the cards that they made here, they used a really thick cardstock that was heavily pressed, almost like a board, a real thin board. But the cards themselves, every card in the set was die cut. In fact, they managed to make 2 series. There's a Series 1 and Series 2. Every card has one of 4 different patterns. They have the themes of a long ball hitter, a base runner, a fielder, and a pitcher. Now, the pitcher is the most dynamic of all of these. It's this big flaming baseball. And they use a lot of colors in the patterns, so it really looks strong and dominant. It's not really elegant, but it's the one that stands out the most. The other 3 are a lot more subdued, and some of them had gold foil, some didn't. Now, for the power hitters, The card you're looking at is actually Series 2. In Series 1, it's all black, but in Series 2, the pattern actually has gold foil for the path of the baseball. Other than that, all of these cards are the same, Series 1 and Series 2. They use the same patterns, the same approach, and even for the inserts, they use pretty much the same thing. We'll see a little bit of variation in those, but for the main set, it's basically the same. And every pack came with 2 checklists that sandwiched all the cards. The checklists are oversized, so the cards were actually seated inside so that they didn't get damaged before they came out of the pack, which was a neat thing that they did with Topps Laser. For the inserts, they made 3 different sets, and both Series 1 and Series 2 had half the set. So each set, first half is Series 1, second half is Series 2. The first set is Bright Spots. And here, this is a card where all the detailing up at the top, it has silver foil over it, and it has etching in it. So it has kind of like a pattern in it, which is really pretty cool. But in Series 2, they changed all the silver foil to a gold holofoil. They still have all the etching in it, but it means that the Series 2 cards look a little bit different from, well, okay, they look a lot different from the Series 1 cards. The next set is Power Cuts, and this is kind of inverted. So here, this is actually a 2-tone metal foil. They have what I believe is pewter around the outside, maybe it's platinum they were going for, but I think it was pewter. And it's just some banding. And then up at the top, they have some bats that are crossed, and this is in gold holofoil. But that's for Series 1. In Series 2, they again went away from the gold holofoil, so you have the contrast one to the other. But the other insert set in this, the third one, is Stadium Stars. And this is where they really took advantage of the laser cutting technology that they had to work with. So this is a fold-over card. And on the front of it, it's all silver foil, and it has all of the etching in it, but it has a very intricate lattice design of a stadium. And then right in the middle is the team logo. And down at the bottom, there's a little box that's open for seeing through to the gold holofoil the player's name. You can see through all the lattice work and the logo, you can see the player in back. And then up at the top, they have a bunch of pennants designed into the top of the stadium. And then you can see through the gold holofoil in the image behind. Now, when you open up the card, this is not designed for the back of this to do anything. The whole point is that you're looking through a screen door, basically, at the player inside. And that's kind of the whole idea of it, but that is the whole idea. It's a really cool idea that they came up with. It's a great trick, and it really carries with the set. Now, they made a set in football also. This is a set where they didn't do a very good job with the design work. I've done a whole video on that if you want to check it out. But with their Stadium Stars, it also carries in pretty much the same way. They used a slightly different design, but this card was so good that they didn't even change it from baseball to football. They just basically used the same thing. And that's the beauty of this card, which makes it easily the most fun, but they also didn't change it from Series 1 to Series 2. Both series are done in exactly the same way. Now with Topps Laser, they didn't really have anywhere to go with it. They didn't make another set in 1997. This was another one and done, although at least this had 2 series in it, and they were able to use it in football. It's a really fun set that they created, but that was kind of the thing in the mid-90s, was there were a lot of sets that came out that were some great ideas that were just kind of playing around, experimenting. And that's the richness. And for baseball, these 3 sets, all 3 are really kind of interesting. So it is fun to look through at these various sets, and they sometimes will happen in little spurts. So like in the case of this, we have 3 sets that don't have anything to do with each other, except that they were all coming out of this idea factory exploration that Topps was doing at the time. And every once in a while you get to explore these little things, so it's kind of fun to do. So that's basically all there is for me to look at with this. I hope that you learned something as I was going through. To check out, like I said, I already did football for Topps Laser, so definitely check that out if you haven't had a chance. Look at the other videos that I've done, because I'm exploring some of the really fun sets that were coming up. And yeah, thank you very much for watching.